The Dragon Quest franchise is quite varied across its mainline and spin-off outings, with the latter branching off with distinct gameplay identities.
From builders to the Musou Heroes titles, there's at least one genre tackled that caters to a JRPG fan's interest. One of the most prominent spin-offs, especially back in the day, is Dragon Quest Monsters. These Pokemon-like entries are usually fan favorites, so seeing a true return to form with Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince was quite the thrilling notion. Of course, the natural question that arose from this release was how the series would manage itself after so long, and whether it would appeal to new fans, veterans, or both. As for the answer, it's a bit of both, but let's delve into the how. Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince follows the demi-human protagonist Pissarro. His aberrational existence, made of a human mother and monster father, has caused him to be a natural outcast. After suffering greatly in his youth by his ailing mother's side, he becomes vengeful after she passes away. Aiming his rage toward the father who abandoned him, Randolfo the Tyrant, his motivation is scorned. Randolfo ends up cursing his son with the inability to harm those possessing monster blood. This doesn't deter Pissarro though. He decides to continue pursuing his revenge, except now as a monster wrangler. Throughout Pissarro's adventure, he makes allies such as the caring elf Rose and the nefarious human Toilen Trouble. They aid Pissarro's efforts as he explores the vast world of Nadiria to bolster his monster collecting capabilities to eventually confront and take down his father once and for all. The narrative of Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince is somewhat of a strange one. For those unaware, Pissarro is a key character in Dragon Quest IV: Chapters of the Chosen, making this entry more effective if one has played through that mainline game. The story of the Dark Prince tries to play both sides by being standalone enough to complete newcomers wholly ignorant of Pissarro's character, and connected enough to compel veteran fans. This sounds like a recipe for disaster that could result in horrid focus, yet it actually works out surprisingly well, especially given that Pissarro is silent. In all honesty, I would much have preferred Pissarro to be a protagonist who spoke, but the team abided by the typical Dragon Quest conventions here. Thankfully, his personality toward himself and others is displayed prominently despite his lack of dialogue throughout scenes, so you'll undoubtedly understand him the further you progress. This emotive connection to Pissarro, while terrific no matter what level of knowledge the player has, is likely the catalyst that will draw newcomers in. The narrative eventually draws in elements that established fans will understand and connect the dots with, leaving the new arrivals out of the loop at points. So the balance certainly isn't perfect, as it sometimes lacks cohesion and refinement, but it's respectable given the ambition of its intentions. As a fan, at least, I was pretty satisfied with the later developments. You can anticipate character cameos and references to further fortify that connective tissue as well. The real meat of The Dark Prince, though, is the gameplay. This turn-based adventure has a fair amount of content to enjoy, primarily revolving around the acquisition of new monsters joining your combative efforts. In battle, Pissarro himself doesn't actively participate since he can't harm monsters. Instead, he stands on the sidelines, stating directions and throwing items should you deem it necessary. You can have up to 8 small monsters with you at a time, with 4 in the front row and 4 in reserves. If your front row falls in battle, the reserves take their place. Larger monsters take up additional slots. There's freedom in how you can inherently approach most fights, with the option to either let the AI take over with general directives per monster, or for you to give specific move orders from a monster's move pool, though the latter isn't possible during arena bouts. Still, this usually available choice in how to operate in combat on the fly presents simultaneous convenience and in-depth strategy, impressively catering to many types of players. It also serves to make grinding a less tedious and time-consuming affair, which is practical due to the extensive playable cast. The Dark Prince features over 500 usable monsters, each distinct with their own affinities, move pools, and stats. This intimidating roster is equally addicting to gradually fill out, with there being 2 main methods of acquisition. The first and more to the point method is scouting a monster mid-battle. Various factors influence the likelihood of a monster deciding to join you, and your success rate is transparently displayed via percentages. Granted, if you fail, the monster grows furious, making the rest of the battle more dangerous. But this potential danger is moderately squashed as you make certain narrative strides. Essentially, the plot of a particular region will make the monsters of that area more likely to join you, so you don't have to worry about recruiting every monster type the second you reach a new map. This sense of risk versus reward never grows dull, even if frustration can still crop up if luck isn't on your side with the percentages. In contrast, the other method of gaining monsters, synthesis, is far less stressful. Akin to your Shin Megami Tenseis and Personas, you can synthesize or fuse multiple monsters together for more powerful creatures. Those who become really invested in min-maxing as much as possible will have a joyous time here, as the parent monster's talents influence what the child receives, making each result, even identical creatures, unique to themselves. Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince is an incredibly satisfying game to get caught up in the gameplay loop of. Reaching new areas, recruiting and fusing monsters, defeating the boss, then rinsing and repeating, never grows old. Admittedly, the low level of difficulty in the game's first third or so doesn't exactly incentivize making the most of what you have, but it eventually pays dividends. Taking advantage of status ailments and stat-boosting moves also pays off in spades, with synthesis capable of producing monsters in leagues of their own. The skill tree-like menus for each monster, filled with skill points from level-ups, add an even greater player individuality. Simply put, the plentiful avenues of player freedom and customization give what you put into it, literally instilling progression with a consistent sense of reward. Unfortunately, there is a significant issue that I constantly faced in Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince: the performance. Regardless of whether you play docked or via handheld mode, the frame rate of this title can become pretty terrible, chiefly in the exterior areas. The game tends to run fine if you're in houses and other interiors, but it can chug considerably when you wander outside. It's never a practical issue since the combat is turn-based and the exploration is always straightforward, but it can make it all feel unpleasant. I'm sincerely hoping that a patch arrives to make the frame rate stable, because if you're especially sensitive to frame rate drops, this can be a deal breaker even for the Switch. As for the exploration itself, it's not really much to write home about. It's standard Dragon Quest with transparent main paths and objectives with occasional side areas containing treasure chests and such. The implementation of fast travel from basically anywhere makes it all immensely convenient as well. Still, the graphical quality of the game is certainly lacking. Perhaps the regularly inconsistent frame rate has impacted my perception, but the environments in The Dark Prince look less defined and pronounced than in Dragon Quest Treasures. It's a minor point that didn't detract from the experience personally, but is still worth noting. One last facet collective, the audio is exactly what you'd expect from Dragon Quest. The music is quintessential of the franchise, so you know what you're in for. If you dislike the Dragon Quest soundtracks, nothing here will change your mind. Regarding the voice acting, you can swap between Japanese and English. The latter is expectedly cheesy and charming, which is all especially accentuated by the monsters' diverse backgrounds. Like the soundtrack, it's standard fare for Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince is a worthy resurgence for this beloved spin-off series. While the messy narrative pacing and poor frame rate bring the adventure down a few notches, the addictive and rewarding gameplay loop with player freedom at its core more than offsets those flaws. You can spend countless hours making your ideal team to your heart's content and engaging with the post-game content after clearing the main story. Further, Dragon Quest IV fans will get more out of this journey than most, but newcomers who exhibit patience can still find themselves invested and enthralled. Ultimately, Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince proves that this series can prosper, and with the promise that they'll continue, we're excited to see where it goes from here. Noisy Pixel is giving Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince an 8 out of 10. Thanks for watching, and thanks to our Patreon subscribers for helping keep our independent operation going. Noisy Pixel is run by a group of gamers working hard to give you the latest news, previews, reviews, and more. Go to patreon.com/noisypixel for details on how you can help, and like, comment, and subscribe to keep up with our future content.
Noisy Pixel.